come around, as short a question as you can. State your name first. Who do we got? Let me come on down. Are we on? Are we on? What's your name?
Ann Armstrong.
Hi, Ann. How are you?
I'm very well, and I'm going to be the next governor of Rhode Island. I don't know if you had remembered that. You had covered me before. But the question I'm asking, this August, I was in the epicenter of what was called the Boston Free Speech rallies. I had been asked to give the opening prayer and a moment of silence for Heather Heyer. And my experience on the ground so differed from what the narrative was that was being put forth in the paper. We were called Nazis and white supremacists. I'm Hebrew Catholic, mixed race, hippie pothead. My colleague is Hebrew, hippie, clergy. And the other people on the podium were Rastafarian. There were people promoting the Palestinian cause. There were people for Black Lives Matters. And there were people with signs against GMOs and Monsanto.
And your question?
My question is, there's a program called Operation Mockingbird that's from, it's been documented, has people in, like Anderson Cooper and people in the Globe, who in certain key stories tell you what you're going to report and what the narrative is. Was that one of the things that happened at the Boston Free Speech rally?
I don't know. I mean, I've been gone from the Globe for a long time. Listen, I know from experience that the Globe newsroom is 225 dedicated journalists who really want to get to the truth. There's no question about it. Are there biases? Of course there are, right? There's no question about it. But there is an editor who is dedicated to the truth. You know, it probably kills more stories than most newspapers run because he's not confident in the truthfulness of them, or he's just. Yeah.
Providence Journal was the only paper in the country that bucked the narrative, and that was only because we were able to give them firsthand report. But it seemed that between the mayor of Boston saying that it was going to be Nazis and white supremacists coming and getting everybody whipped up, the scene on the ground was quite different than what the papers reported.
They're not influenced by anyone from the outside. They do their job.
Thank you.
Let's go over here. Joe Trill is running for governor of the state of Rhode Island, former state representative, and chairman of, stand up, Donald Trump campaign in 2016.
That is correct. My question is more of a rhetorical question, but I would be interested in the input of the panel. I think one of the things that's hurt the media's credibility is the fact that if you watch a news organization and you know where that reporter stands politically, they lose credibility instantly. And I think we're seeing that on the national scene. I've been 18 years in politics in Rhode Island, and I can honestly tell you, I don't know where Kate stands. I don't know where you stand. I don't know where Channel 10 stands. I don't know where Channel 12 stands. And I think that enables us to kind of preserve a certain quality and uniqueness that we have in the press in Rhode Island. And I'd just be interested if anybody wanted to comment about it.
Well, I'll comment on my social media. It's generally pictures of Bear the dog and some meals and cocktails out. And I think it's incredibly important. We've actually let some people go over the time who wanted to express their personal political opinions in social media. Mike, you had a few experiences like that at the Globe in which reporters stepped out of their role.
Yeah, you have to. I personally don't participate in social media because I just I don't know personally. Like, I don't know anyone whose career was helped by being on social media. I can name you 1,000 people whose careers were tanked by something stupid they did. You know, when I became first CEO of Hill Holiday, I was called by one of the lawyers in town. He goes, "Don't have any email. Don't have email." He goes, "Why?" Because I've been a lawyer for 30 years. I've never had a client helped by an email. And so it is. Sometimes, and I think it's all part of the balancing act. I think people will get there. Sometimes keep your opinions to yourself. There's nothing wrong with keeping your opinions to yourself. who cares what you think? I can't believe anyone cares what I think. That's why, so I'm going to get a Twitter account and I'm going to tweet what I think. Who cares what I think? I don't care what I think. And so I think that's where you have to.
Jim Murphy,
gotta be smart.
in the presidential game, do you look at what the biases of reporters and media members were, what they were showing their hand about certain comments about presidential candidates and their own expressions?
I'm more on the political side and the management side, not so much the comm side, but I know that they, the professional press staff tend to, know the reporters who they're talking to, and they've looked at what they've written in the past, and they know what issues they're interested in. So I think generally, if you're advising a candidate or an office holder who's going into a meeting, you can say, hey, this one might be a little rough or not so rough. So I think most campaigns feel that some interviews are going to be more friendly than others, but I think it's more a function of what the outlet is. So I think if it's a major news outlet in a market, you're going to deal with it whether you think you're for them or against them. If it's a little weekly newspaper out here who's just going to give you a hard time, you ignore it.
Even if it's radio or TV, the way you talk to people is different on radio and TV a bit.
I think it's more where the votes are,
yeah,
where's
the
your
tone,
targeting, where you're scheduling, where you're
Yeah.
spending your time, and you go there and you need the exposure to get your message out in that geography. But you do your homework, sure.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Robert Lever. There's a very provocative article in I think it's the most recent Atlantic Monthly, that basically said the office of the president is wrongly designed. In other words, it was basically designed for times that don't exist anymore, and that how we got Trump was because he figured out that the office no longer works and needs a redesign. I'd just be curious for your thoughts.
I mean, I think that you could say that for so much of government. You can say that about the town meeting format.
I would agree with
Right, right. It doesn't work. It was designed for the 1800s, 1700s. The issues today are so complex, and so you see these town meetings. No one can know about the technology, waste management. These issues of fire. You can talk about anything, and I agree that he tapped into.
He figured it out.
Yeah, and just by fighting it and being the anti-that, he tapped into a vein,
Well,
and it was rich.
I think to Jim's point too, I mean, do Americans have a thirst to really restructure things? Do they really want to address the primary system? Do they really want to address the office of the president? That's the big question. Or at the end of the day, are they going to kind of sit back complacently and say, well, I guess it's good enough?
To your point, Kate, the author was not hopeful.
Okay.
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, I think in business, right, and I've been in business for 30, almost 40 years, you typically reinvent the company every 5 years. You strip it down to the studs and you rebuild it. And these institutions haven't been rebuilt in 200 years. Yeah.
Bob?
With our 18th century Constitution. Yeah, I mean, I think we can. I think people are maybe beginning to think of things like separating, turning the president's job into two people: the head of state, head of government, more the European pattern. And I realize we hear this about every 8 years. Eventually, a third party will come along. It'll become the second party, one of the two parties. I think that will happen. I think with technology and the messaging system changing so rapidly, it could happen faster than we think. Could be somebody like Governor Kasich, for example, of Ohio, leading it. So I think there's a higher possibility of major change like that than there has been for a long time.
I think on a macro level, the thing that, in terms of changes, based on what I know, I think it would take a while, but it's also started. I think there are 10 states. I think Connecticut is the most recent to pledge that they would cast their electoral votes for the winner nationally.
of the
Popular vote. I think that the more likely, maybe not in my lifetime, but I could see the Electoral College being under siege because and for me, I think the irony there is that it kind of really is that 10, 12 states decide the president. And that kind of goes against the fundamental, I mean, no disrespect, how many presidential candidates do you see in Rhode Island? Or Wyoming?
Federalism.
Or, because when you were a national political director for a campaign, whether you were me or you were Robbie Mook, you got about 32 major markets up there, and you're just flying people and surrogates around to those 32, and it really doesn't change.
Pawtucket did not get hit much this last cycle.
Hi. My name is Ed Zesk, and before you start restructuring the Constitution, which when I was a naval officer, swore to preserve and protect, I think the fundamental question here is, are we a democracy that happens to have a capitalist economic system, or are we a capitalist country that happens to have a democracy? And I think the democracy is more important. If we don't have campaign finance reform, America's going nowhere. If candidates are bought and sold, legislatures are bought and sold by oligarchs, which is essentially what's happening, we're never going to succeed and preserve the Constitution. I don't think it's antiquated. What I think has happened is it's been bought. And we need to fundamentally reform campaign finance. Don't reform the Constitution. I think the Constitution will survive. So if you really want to know where America's going, if we can't fix the electoral process, if we can't deal with a situation where someone is elected president with not the majority of the electorate, if we can't get people to turn out and actually vote because they think their vote actually means something and it's not already bought and paid for, we're in big trouble.
Bernie Sanders, a little exception to that? Throw it out there. We haven't talked much about Bernie Sanders tonight?
Well, I think a lot of people who didn't vote for Hillary because they preferred a more progressive candidate. And instead of saying, I'm not gonna vote for change, they didn't vote at all. And look what happened.
Or some of them voted for Trump.
Well, you know what? I don't want to take up too much time. I just spent 3 weeks in Tennessee. My baby sister lives there. And we live in a bubble here, let me tell you. Because there is a fundamental issue here of the fact that no one was listening to these people. No one. And I haven't heard anything come out of the Democratic Party that gives me any sense that something's being done to respond to them. And so we can talk about how bad Trump is, and I personally think he's, morally corrupt and a bad president. But who am I going to say you should have instead? I haven't seen anything come out of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, for that, you need a presidential candidate or a plausible presidential candidate to speak to that. It's all very diffuse now. The Democrats are trying to get more, the working class people. They won a couple of congressional seats, but it's very diffuse now. I think Jim would agree. It's very diffuse. We have no idea who the leader of the Democratic Party is going to be in a couple of years, and you need that to speak to that. Yeah, right.
We got one more over here. Yes, sir.
Phil Stone. To piggyback off what he said about older people, I'm curious to hear the panel's opinion on how we can educate K through 12 students and college students, university students on the political front, on the media. What's going to happen in 10 years? How are they going to engage in politics? How are they going to find out about politics? And how are they going to separate truth from fake news?
Mike?
Well, it's interesting. I'm a graduate of St. Anselm College in New Hampshire, which has the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, which is a really important institution, not only in New Hampshire, but certainly on the campus. And I think colleges have to get more engaged like that. I mean, obviously, Jim, we both touched the Reagan campaign in 1980. I was on campus, and he was working for it in New Hampshire. But this Institute of Politics is there's an event every day that students go to. And so, but I think more colleges should have political, it's easy for New Hampshire because of where it stands in the primary cycle. But you have to take an active role and make it important. It's not just liberal arts, it's not just business. That colleges have to invest in training kids for politics and get them interested and engaged.
Bob?
I think the problem is a lot deeper than that. Do they teach civics anymore?
Yep.
School, I don't think they do. I think I took
Or
a
citizenship.
civics class in sixth grade. You know, at least the basics, you know, the 3 branches of government, federalism, all that stuff, the basics.
Yeah.
Most of the young people I talk to, including, by the way, graduates of extremely expensive, fancy, elitist colleges, don't know nearly as much of this stuff they should know. They don't understand the system in which they're voting, you know, if they bother to vote. And I think that we have to reconstitute some kind of civics education in the schools. Probably, I guess, maybe the middle school, you know, period. Yeah.
It might be good to have them pass the test that immigrants pass in order to become U.S.
Yeah,
citizens.
right, absolutely. They have to read the Constitution. I mean, I don't.
That would be a start.
Yeah, like, but sooner rather than later. The other thing is the teaching of history, which has taken a huge hit, in my view, in the last 30 or 40 years. And I'll repeat the old cliche, but it should be repeated. If you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. And we have to bring that back too, combined with the civics.
Listen, I want to thank our great panel. I want to thank them. You know, Mike and Jim came from distances away. Jim gets the hand for the furthest distance away for
Warren?
coming into. I think he's down in Virginia
Oh, he is,
or
okay.
something. And Mike, thank you so much for taking all the time. Kate, thank you. Bob Whitcomb, always a pleasure, and everybody for coming in today. Really appreciate you taking the time, everybody who's tuned in. Thank you for participating. This will all be cut up. It'll be out tomorrow on GoLocal, and appreciate the discussion. This is the first of many of these conversations GoLocal is going to be sponsoring. Again, I want to thank the folks at the Pavilion at Grace, and also our production team, who's just been spectacular. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and appreciate it. Feel free to engage on social media and send us an email as well. We'll forward it over to Mike Sheehan. Thank you, and have a great night. Thank you. Great. Thanks, everyone.